Okay, which means you can admit everybody, but you need to give me permission, I think, to share. So you just click on my name and give me permission to share.
There's nothing that says that I can give you permission. It seems that you can just do it.
No, I can't. So you just go to my name and you click next to it where it says more.
Yep. Allow record, put in waiting room, spotlight video. You're muted.
Yeah.
It's not giving us the option to allow you to record, so to screen share, unfortunately. The joys of modern technology, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all right. We're okay. We're still okay. So I've reclaimed it.
There we go.
The dog is stealing the show.
Dog.
Too cute. Too cute for the cameras.
Okay, Tom, you're now the host, which means you should be able to admit people.
Yep, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. And we're recording, aren't we?
We are.
Are we?
Yeah, top left, recording.
Okay, bro. Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us, ADHD Wise UK. My name is Janine Harris. You've got Tom Nicholson, you've got Becca Channon, and you've got Ali Champion. We all have ADHD, and when we have been having our conversations, we have been really quite struck by how important it is for young people to hear the voices of other young people. Which is why when the second I said to Rebecca, how about doing this? She was like, yep. And the second I said to Ali about doing it, she was like, yep. And then when I mentioned it to Tommy, we were like, yep. So we actually think it's really important that young people hear from other young people. And on that basis, I guess I should be quiet. But I've got ADHD, so I'm not very good at being quiet. And so, yeah, I will allow, I'm going to sort of like make it so everybody else can introduce themselves. So Ali, are you okay to go first?
Yeah, hello, my name is Ali. I'm 17 and I really enjoy engineering. I'd like to be an electronics engineer when I'm older. I'm doing my A-levels at the moment, but I've actually, I dropped out of A-levels last year and I'm retaking a year because I was having issues with my mental health, which I've now figured out was because I have ADHD, and it was really sort of impacting the way that I studied and the way that I structured my study. I started having ADHD coaching sessions with Janine a couple of months ago, and it was really quite transformative. And now I'm really enjoying sort of learning how to structure my life so that it's a lot easier to cope with my ADHD symptoms.
Thank you, Ali. Becca?
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm 17. I'm currently doing my A-levels as well. I do psychology and I'd like to continue to study that up to a PhD level. That's my dream career, like Ali's with engineering. I do online school, not just because of the current situation, but in general. I was already doing it because I find the school environment really difficult because of my neurodiversity. And this just works a lot better for me and my mental health, and makes me feel much more secure. So that's what I'm currently doing.
Thank you, Becca. Tom?
Hello, my name's Tom Nicholson. I am currently a graduate tutor of mental health nursing at Northumbria University, where I am doing a PhD looking at the parental journey and experience of the diagnosis of children with ADHD. Before that, I was a ADHD specialist nurse in the neurodevelopmental service, where I was responsible for being part of the team of diagnosing and assessing and supporting children and young people with who were neurodivergent or had neurodiverse needs. And I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 5, so I've lived my life as a neurodiverse person.
Thank you, Tom. Can I just let everybody know, in case you hadn't noticed, the session is being recorded. So if you want to anonymise yourself, which you can do by changing your name or by switching your video off, you are totally welcome to do that. I'm sure you can understand the topics that we cover. It's very, very important, and therefore we want to reach people far and wide, so aspects of this will be made public. So there'll be opportunities to ask questions at the end. The chat facility is open throughout, which Tom is monitoring so that he can gather together your questions, but bear in mind that the 4 of us have ADHD. Personally, I don't want to be looking at the chat at the same time as doing everything else, because guess what I'll do? I'll go off track. As Tom and I have done this before, we tend to try to make them semi-structured. So we have like a plan of where we're going to keep us on track, but we'll free flow around it and tangent here, there and everywhere a little bit, but hopefully end within sort of like an hour and 15 minutes. Because actually, do you know what, after that, like, we've got ADHD and therefore attention's going to lag. So yeah, do anonymise yourself if you want to, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, so these are the topics that when I asked people what they wanted us to cover, this is what people came back and said. So, and then we have this one, mental health and well-being. Who wants to start? Tom?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. So I'm gonna put on numerous hats throughout these sort of talks. So I'll start off with my research clinical hat on for answering this, in that we know that ADHD has huge co-occurring, some people use comorbidity, I prefer co-occurring difficulties. Especially anxiety is very high for people who have ADHD. Again, additional ASD, autism spectrum disorder, depression, anxiety, OCD, etc. Personally, I have some lovely co-occurring difficulties as well. I have co-occurring OCD, and I also have some of the more ASD traits, but not enough for a diagnosis. So I've got that lovely neuro jigsaw going on, but in that, it impacts on your mental health in every possible way. But I'm sure that'll come out as we talk more about how ADHD impacts on your mental health, especially through your teenage years. I don't know about you, Ali and Becca.
Yeah, for me, it was the case that I sort of came into this from having issues with my mental health, and then understanding that that was because of my neurodiversity. So my mental health was the thing that I acknowledged first, and then when I talked to a doctor, they suggested that I look at the possibility of ADHD and ASD. But yeah, especially when you're going through school and exams are really stressful, A-levels are very stressful, so you know they're definitely are very closely linked for me.
Becca?
Yeah, I've had like the mental health issues as well, partly due to ADHD, partly due to other things, obviously, because life is very complicated, but ADHD definitely didn't help. I didn't get my diagnosis until quite late on. I only got it last year when I was 16, so I'm now 17. I had a lot of trouble with my mental health, and since my ADHD diagnosis, although I still have difficulties, it has significantly improved, and I would definitely say they're linked.
Do you think that if you had known sooner, Becca, that you would have been, your mental health would have been less affected?
Yes, absolutely. I would have had a lot less issues with mental health surrounding, academia and also, personal family life. Obviously, it's more strange because you have these conflicting issues with everyone else around you because you're expected to do certain things, and so I had a lot of problems with friends, and just it really, really did affect my mental health, and I wish that I hadn't got my diagnosis sooner, because I think I could have avoided a lot of unnecessary issues.
Yeah, I've got that. I totally agree with that. I think that if I'd been able to identify my ADHD symptoms sooner, then I would have had a lot of an easier time at school.
I think there's sometimes a difficulty as well between teasing out what is ADHD related and what is mental health related. So For instance, you know, hyperkinesis and being hyperactive can feel very much like anxiety. In one of them, you're excited and you're moving around and you feel like you've got to be moving. You feel this energy inside of you. Yet that's also how anxiety feels like sometimes, or how when you're really angry, that can feel like that sometimes as well. And I think it can be quite hard, especially when you're
Yeah,
younger.
definitely when you're not allowed to move.
Pardon?
Especially when you're not allowed to move, like in the classroom setting where you're not allowed to walk around and stuff. That does feel like anxiety because you're having to repress this impulse, and it does create an anxiety, doesn't it? Because you can't resist it, and it just creates this feeling of tension inside you. It's like a physical manifestation of anxiety. It's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, because your body is designed to move and you can't. And here we are, the four of us sat on our swivel chairs moving.
Yeah. I think it was Ali mentioned that we're all on swivel chairs doing this right now. And as an adult, my job, I can stand up and walk about whenever I want. You're not offered that privilege as a child often, and as a young person, and then as a teen, and then in college, and then at university. Like, it's only in certain environments where we're allowed the privilege of being able to move. Yet as adults, we make that decision because we're now old enough to make it.
I'm assuming you can all see the next slide. You're on ADHD and emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So often when I'm out and I'm delivering training, and I'll say about, you know, how many of you are dealing with young people who are overtly emotional, and there's not many hands go up. And then when I say, when you consider that overexcitability and rage that's come out of nowhere are part of emotional dysregulation, like loads more hands go up in terms of teachers understanding that isn't anger, that's not behavior, well, it is anger, that's not behavioural, that's emotional. It often comes across as quite a shock to teachers and other professionals when I'm working with them, and also often with parents actually. And then, you know, here we are with young people, which is a real privilege, you know, to recognise that when you've lost it and you're hot-tempered, irritable and volatile, that's part of the emotional regulation aspect of ADHD. Tom, do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, well, one thing I've been quite interested in recently is the changing diagnostic criteria over time, and how the ICD-11, which just came out, has changed the diagnostic criteria a little bit in 2018. But also what's happened is there's a real agreement in the literature that emotional regulation difficulties, intense emotions, are incredibly prevalent for just about everyone with ADHD. It's not classed as a criteria for diagnosis, but it's very much there for everyone. And there's an argument that part of it is to do with the ADHD and the makeup of the brain and the way in which the world is seen. There's another argument in that, which is like, for every single person who has ADHD, life has been harder in some way. Life has been more challenging. People don't treat you the same way. Self-esteem is hindered and damaged because we'll talk about it in a little bit, about how you never quite meet people's expectations, or your own expectations perhaps. And with that comes this new concept that's coming out a lot called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is where for people with ADHD, the sense of rejection or feeling like you've been rejected or you've been criticized can cause a huge emotional reaction. And it's because of it overly sensitive to criticism, because of how criticized as a group we have been over the years. I don't know about you, Ali and Becca.
Yes. I hate being told off. With all my heart, I despise it. I do absolutely everything to avoid being had a go at.
Absolutely the same. So true throughout school. It's the same case, and it's really interesting what you're saying, Tom. I think it's a very interesting area. I know, like, I come from a family of very neurodiverse people, so every interaction that we have is going to be sort of having these different levels of the issues that we have, and one of those is the emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
But ADHD is a condition of dysregulation. We are dysregulated in terms of how we spend our time, our money, our energy, our focus. It's not a deficit of attention, it's a deficit in being able to regulate our attention. And it's a core facet of what ADHD is that, you know, things are just not particularly well balanced for us. It is estimated that we receive 20,000 additional negative messages on top of those that an average child would get, because we have behaviours associated with ADHD. So we are told we are wrong, naughty, don't do this, don't do that, stop this, stop that, you're this, you're that, 20,000 more times by the age of 12 than the average person. And that works out to about 4.5 per day. And when you consider that if one person came up to you today and told that you were useless, lazy, stupid, and the other names that tend to be associated with ADHD, it's not really any wonder that our mental health struggles as a result, and that we are rejection sensitive, and that we're struggling with our emotions. We're going to have much stronger reactions to that, aren't we? Mm-hmm. Whether that's biological, whether that's environmental, I'm sure we probably all agree that's probably a combination of the two.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I wanted to talk about shame, because I grew up really embarrassed and shamed of everything that I couldn't manage. Everyone kept telling me to try harder, but you know what? I was already trying my absolute damnedest, and I just felt shamed my whole life for the things I couldn't manage that everybody else could.
Yeah. One thing I like to do whenever I talk about shame is to make the distinction between shame and guilt, because I don't think in the general populace this is always understood. If you imagine guilt as feeling bad about something that you have done, and that guilt's a really positive thing actually, because it makes us become better people. You do something that hurts someone, you feel guilty, you change your behavior, and then you become a better, more well-rounded person who's gone through growth. However, shame is really different. Shame is this like toxic, malignant experience where it's not I did a bad thing, it's I am a bad person. It's when you internalize that experience. And in ADHD, it almost melded with your sense of self and your sense of being, that I keep forgetting people's birthdays. I keep getting distracted when my friends are talking to me. I get bored in groups and just walk out. All of that happens. And then actually, is there something wrong with me? And I'm also fighting against this narrative from everyone else that, oh yeah, but ADHD doesn't really exist, does it? Which again adds in this other layer of having to fight against who I am, what I am. And shame is it's toxic in ADHD, in anyone, but it's very prevalent in ADHD.
I think the thing that gets me about this one is, for many people with ADHD, shame arises from the repeated failure to meet the expectations from parents, teachers, friends, bosses in the world. The reason I approached Rebecca and Ali about this is because they were told all their lives how capable, smart, and how they could do anything they wanted to in life. And actually, when it came to it, the process of going through GCSEs and was actually really, 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 really hard. And as Ali has said, she's retaking a year. And as Rebecca has said, she is now doing her A-levels from home because it didn't work for them. And even though they're the brightest, they're perceived as being these really bright people, it didn't quite work. And, guys, talk to me about that, sort of how has shame impacted how you feel now?
Well, I think for me, so I went to a sort of secondary school which was more selective, and so there was a lot of very hardworking people there, and the teachers pushed us very hard, and especially like I just my whole experience of being at school is I associate with feeling bad that I can't do what other people around me are doing, and definitely holding myself to a very high standard while not being able to do and being frustrated that I can't do things that are perceived as simple, like scheduling my time and meeting deadlines and that sort of thing. But I think also school as a whole is structured in a way that you are directly comparing yourself to other people, and that's just sort of the way that it's structured, and it's hard to get sort of distance yourself from that, but it's definitely a process. And I feel like today compared to with a year ago, now I'm much I'm able to see what other people are doing and not say, oh, I'm not good enough, or just say, oh, I can learn from them, and oh, let's try something different, and then I can learn from this, rather than beating myself up about it.
Thank you. Becca?
Sorry, could you just remind me of the original question, because my mind has gone.
So how has the shame of your ADHD related behaviours impacted you?
Shame. Well, when I was in like lower school, like, you know, primary school and the lower years of secondary school, I didn't have to try at all. It wasn't hard. We had gifted programs at school, and I was always, you know, really high up in achievement, and I was always getting awards. And eventually that kind of died down, not because I stopped being able to keep up with the work or because I wasn't as smart anymore. It's because more is expected of you as you get older, which is why, particularly in girls, ADHD often isn't recognised until later, because you're able to handle what is happening when you're younger, because there's less expected of you. So when you come home, when you get older, you're expected to do your own laundry, tidy your own room, you know, maybe cook for yourself, etc., etc. And that was when I failed to meet people's expectations, and that took a massive toll on my self-esteem. I felt like a failure, and I felt ashamed, which is ridiculous. And that much shouldn't be expected of a child anyway. I shouldn't have felt like a failure at 13, because my life was just beginning. And getting my ADHD diagnosis has made me realise that I'm not worse, I am different. And I say it all the time, and, you know, if you go to support groups and things, you've probably had me say it multiple times. There's nothing wrong with us. It's just that the world wasn't designed for us. And so we're set up to fail. I'm sure it's not on purpose, but the world was set up by neurotypical people, and so we are set up to fail, and we have to work harder right now. And eventually, I hope at least, that will become different. And we are, you know, we are evolving in the way that we treat people with neurodiverse conditions. But I shouldn't have felt like a failure at 13, because I was a child. And the fact that I felt like I'd failed in life already because I couldn't do things through no fault of my own is extremely sad. And I'm really glad that I got my ADHD diagnosis, because that did change the game for me.
I think I'm going to add in as well. I think, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone, but particularly when you're quite high achieving, that dual diagnosis or dual co-occurring issues of giftedness or intelligence even and ADHD, it adds a different dimension to this, where I find all the work so easy. I wasn't trying hard at university, I wasn't working hard, but then I just didn't do it. The work's not hard, I just don't start it. The essays aren't challenging, but just sitting down and actually writing the damn thing, that's the problem. It's the basics. It's remembering, set up your internet bills, as opposed to the high concept philosophy. That was my experience.
That everything was within your capability, but that didn't mean you were able to do it.
Yeah.
I have the exact same things. I take double maths at A level, and I understand the concepts, but I make mistakes so frequently because I find it really hard to focus on the paper and the question. I think that's something that's quite common.
Yeah, we were talking about the importance of you analysing the question, weren't we? And sort of like getting to the point where you are having to be a slave to the criteria in order to get those things right, rather than sort of skim reading what the question is. Yeah, okay. So I've got a bit of Maslow in here, because I think it's actually really, really important to think about it from this point of view, and young people thriving or becoming self-actualized. Now, I'd like to think that everybody here has their physiological needs met. But then actually a lot of our children might not be getting, young people might not be getting enough sleep, for example, so then maybe not, and they might be having an unhealthy relationship with food. And actually most people don't drink enough either. So maybe not everybody's got that like bottom rung of their physiological needs being met. And we were talking just before this session about whether we felt safe at school, and all four of us had felt that we didn't feel entirely safe at school. You know, that feeling safe means being free of bullies, and that we were able to sort of like function without constantly being in trouble or being judged for things. And actually none of us really felt like we had that actually in school. And then of course you got the love and belonging. People who, like us, are different and often very misunderstood, and all four of us were talking about the bullying aspects that we'd experienced and how difficult that was for us. And then going into the green zone, which is where it says esteem, if you see the first word is respect, one of the biggest things, maybe not for us four particularly, because I think we're sort of like that we've sort of not had that so bad, but Rebecca's got a twin brother, for example, and he was always being told he wasn't respectful of other teachers. But I can tell you now, every single time he was accused of that, he was absolutely mirroring the attitude of the person he was facing, because that's what we do. So if you treat us with a lack of respect, that's what you're going to get back. And I'm, even as an adult, I am really bad for that. I have to really, really take myself to task and make a decision to be bigger than the other person that I'm facing, and it's a real effort even now. So I'm very sure I didn't manage it in my teenage years, which were a bit of a blur for me, to be honest, because I was a school refuser and stuff. So.
I would agree. The argument that you're supposed to respect the teachers because they're in a position of authority, I have never agreed with, actually, and I don't agree with it as an adult. You gain respect and you earn respect by being someone deserving of respect, not by nature of your position within a hierarchy. And the teachers didn't like being challenged, and I didn't like being challenged. So we would challenge each other, and calls to authority didn't make sense to me. Oh, well, I'm the adult, I know best. And actually I'm going, that doesn't make any sense to me logically. And today, and even now as an adult, I'm looking back going, actually, you know what, I was in the right. Not all the time. Sometimes I was a terror. But
No.
I was in the right, and actually it was adults not being able to apologize and say they were wrong or admit fault or admit that they had been inappropriate with that they'd gotten too angry, they had gotten too emotional. And I think it's really important for when you're growing up for adults around you to be doing that as well. And that's also part of respect. It is,
but the reality is that we don't actually have that level of influence over other people's behaviour. And if we want to get to the point where we are thriving, where we're self-actualised and we live in our lives where we want to, we have to acknowledge that we can't actually change the behaviour of the people. So sometimes it is about sucking it up and just deciding to be the bigger person, because otherwise how do you get to the point of self-actualisation? Speaking to somebody earlier, and I was just like, you are absolutely right. But where is that absolutely right going to get you in that situation? Are you going to get the job you want if you hold on to this line, even though you are right? Is that going to get you what you want to get? And I think that's really hard for us with our emotional regulation, and particularly if ASD is in the mix as well. And, you know, you've got all the autistic spectrum where it's just like hanging on to, yes, but I'm right. Is that going to get you where you want to get to? Yeah. And I think then that comes down to you having enough respect and not giving too much of a monkey's what other people think, and being able to just kind of take control of yourself to move through that situation and keeping in mind where you're going. But absolutely, I agree with Tom completely. There is definitely a real shortage of adults, professionals, and even parents sometimes who can own their own stuff and say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
And then that's just modeling the behavior we want from young people, but it's often not what we see. And it does my head in, especially when I go out and I'm working in schools and I'm like, but and I'm watching the teacher misbehave, and I'm watching the child get into trouble. But anyway, we need to stop that because I'm recording this, so I better not say too much about that.
I want to quickly add in there actually that growing up until I was about 24, I had a real problem with apologizing. I found it really difficult to apologize because I always thought I was in the right. Whereas what helped me was, and for a note for parents out there, is teaching that an apology is not about saying that the other person is right and you're wrong. It's about saying that you respect the other person more than being right. I care about you more than I care about being right. And that cognitive change, that conceptual change, can be really helpful for someone who's maybe a bit more rigid, cognitively rigid. But I am right. Yes, but...
Yeah, that's not going to get you anywhere, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I see it a lot, actually, probably more with ASD than I do with ADHD. But
yeah.
Do one of you girls want to talk about this?
I'll start because I like physics, and we've got a lovely picture of a Newton's cradle. A lot of what I've been learning and through ADHD coaching recently has been about keeping up momentum once you get started with the task. For me, I find it really, really difficult to get started, but once I have that momentum, the rest of my day is a lot easier to put together. And sort of that's something that I found really helpful, is that realizing and understanding that motivation is a lot to do with how you line up your tasks and how you approach them.
Mm-hmm.
Becca?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's about starting off, because it's about once you're in a task, you can focus on it. You can just work away on it for hours and hours and hours, and you won't even hear if someone comes into the room. But it's about getting started. So for me, in the morning, I wake up really early. I'm talking like 5 or 6 a.m. Because then I get the house to myself, and it just means I can do what I need to do in the morning. Before I go to sleep at night, I set up my planner for the next day, my habit tracker, so I make sure I eat and drink, because I can forget. Because if I get really engrossed in something, then I might forget to drink enough water that day, and it's really important to remind yourself to do that. For me, that's keeps me motivated, is having that list ready for me in the morning, first thing when I wake up. That's on top of my alarm, so I have to look at it when I wake up in the morning. It's about setting up your day so that you can get the most out of it that you can. Yeah. That's what that means to me.
And then there's also removing the distractions, isn't there? So one of the things that you do is ask mum to take your phone off you.
Yeah.
I want to add to the parents out there as well that when we expect teens and young people to be able to do these things and have these skills, I still struggle with this now on a daily basis. So thinking about when I'm doing my PhD, lockdown's been terrible for my motivation at first, because I'll be sitting with a new chapter and it'll just be a blank screen, and the thought of starting is so dreadful. It's dread. It's absolute dread, because what if it's not good enough? What if I don't write this good enough? I haven't even put pen to paper, but what if I write the wrong thing? So I'll go and clean the garage, I'll go and make some food, I'll go and have a cuppa, I'll do everything else that's possible, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks has gone and I've not looked at it. And yet when I started it a few weeks ago, I've written like 20,000 words in about 2 weeks. But the getting started, for me as an adult who's very aware, who has lots of skills, who's developed lots of strategies, I still get it wrong, especially in lockdown, because everything is so different. All my usual habits are shot. I can't go to the library and in a quiet booth anymore. I'm at home now with all these distractions. I've got 2 monitors. I have to keep minimizing on this screen over here, like my messenger. I'm like, why have I got it open? I'm gonna close it now. And I'm an adult. So it's about how much do we expect of the young people, but also how can we scaffold that, and how can we support that and be the motivation for other people, because that's what you need to be sometimes.
I think that one of the things that's important to note is that in Ali and Becca's case, it isn't their parents that have put those things in place. It is them themselves who have looked at their situation and their way of being and said, okay, what do I need, and then asked for help in order to achieve that. But it comes from within them. They are intrinsically motivated to learn, and that's a lot of what this talk was about, and the reason we chose to do this particular topic, because there's a whole group of people out there who are intrinsically motivated from within themselves. They're ambitious and they're able, who nonetheless can't quite get past themselves to get on top of things, to get ahead, and they're always firefighting as a result of it. And you know, these strategies that Ali and Rebecca are talking to you about, they've come from within themselves, although they may have had them coached out of them to sort of like get to the point where they understand what might work, and tried a few things until they get to the point where they know what does work. But that they are intrinsically motivated. The motivation comes from inside them. No one is saying, you've got to do this. No, there's no carrot and there's no stick. It comes from within them. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the fire in your belly to achieve something. You know, Rebecca has said about sort of like being able to dive deep into something and shut everything else out and really hyper focus on what they're interested in. And it does come from being interested in, and that's really hard when you're younger, because you didn't choose your subjects, or at least you chose your subjects from within a small range, whereas Becca and Ali at this point have chosen their subjects. And having spoken to them both individually, I know that the reason they chose their subjects is because not because they were the ones that were going to get them the most money in the future, because that's extrinsic. They have chosen things that they're genuinely interested and passionate about, and that's really important for any young person and any person, but even more so for someone with ADHD, because the boring stuff to us is harder than it is for a neurotypical person. Boredom for a person with ADHD is crippling, whereas it's annoying for somebody who doesn't have ADHD. There's a huge difference in terms of our ability to get through boredom. So I love what Ali and Becca have said, and I love what Tom has said, but that comes from an internal drive to want to do these things and to want to better themselves. And it's only from that they have got to that stage where they're actually self-actualized or thriving. I
don't know where I read this quote, but I really liked it, and it said, shame is one of the greatest learning difficulties. And it was, and I really like that, because shame and low self-esteem can be a block to that intrinsic motivation, because the answer becomes, what's the point? I won't do it anyway. I'll fail before I start. So if we've got an experience of shame going on as well, we need to be tackling that as well, which is a different angle. But it's about that self-compassion, that self-care, that you are okay and you are acceptable and lovable and good enough with who you are, regardless of how successful you do, regardless of how many A-levels you get, regardless of whether you go to university, like, you are good enough. And almost drilling that into the narrative of that person's life, because you're probably one of the few people who are actually giving that narrative.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead. I totally agree, and I was actually going to bring up the shame thing as well, because you know, you've put mood first on the slide, and for me that was the first thing that I had to attack before I even thought about the logistics of how to start my day and how to organize myself. Is, you know, just from being so stressed out at school, I had a lot of sort of underlying shame about, you know, not feeling like I was performing to the standard that I wanted to. And I think that identifying that you are not feeling good about yourself is really, really important, and probably the first thing that you need to do before you attack the logistics of how you motivate yourself. But yeah, like, it's really interesting how shame and how not feeling good about your performance can really, really take you several steps back.
Looking at that Newton's cradle, you may as well slide a piece of cardboard in between those balls for shame, another one for stress, another one for anxiety, and another one for perfectionism. You may as well slide a piece of cardboard in between those things. So it is a question of young people setting themselves up to succeed, and their parents doing the same, helping them with that. Praise is massive, and actually some of us find it very difficult to accept praise. but that actually means that person needs it more, not less, funnily enough. But you are stopping that momentum. You're preventing learning if you're operating from a point of view of shame, stress, and anxiety. You are just preventing momentum and motivation, and how is mood ever going to improve from that situation?
Yeah, just before we go on to the next slide, I want to remind people that there is a chat function for any questions. If you've got any questions on any of this, just to type them into the text in the chat function, and I'll curate those questions for the end of the session. We'll have a little bit of Q&A, maybe, depending on time.
Being as you just paused it there for a second, I wanted to also say neurodiversity, just because that might not be a term that's known to everybody. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term for conditions such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, tics, and a whole host of other things that are neurological differences that come under the umbrella term of neurodiversity, because we have diversity in the way our brains function, rather than actually us being, we are supposed to be different. And 20% of the population are believed to be neurodiverse. Therefore, we're not an accident. We are supposed to be here. We have our benefits. We are essential to the development of the human race. We're just different. Come on, girls, you talk about this.
Where are they going to start? Perfection paralysis. So I can't start a task. For my GCSEs, I basically hardly revised. I did in like several months before, like a year before, and then I stopped after everything that was happening with my ADHD diagnosis. There was a lot of drama, because I was so scared that I would study really, really hard, work, and do my best, and it still wouldn't be perfect. And I was so concerned about not being perfect, I decided it was best to just not try. Because then if I failed, I could say, well, I didn't try. So that makes sense, and that genuinely made me feel better than doing my best, because the perfectionism is so deep-rooted, and that carries on even now, and kind of you have to try and push it aside. It's very, very difficult, because that's like embedded in me, because I was told from a young age that I was supposed to succeed, and not being able to do that due to my struggles with ADHD has been very, very limiting for my self-esteem and also for my achievements. So, right. Go on then, Ali.
Yeah, I've had very similar experiences, probably more recently during my A-levels. You know, it's really, really overwhelming when you feel this internal pressure that you want to do the very best you can. And, you know, with that along comes fear of not doing the best. And for me, that just kept on building up and building up and building up, and then it would just completely stop me. And you know, sadly, I think I'm a really passionate person, especially about the subjects that I've chosen. Yet somehow, because of this blockage, I lost all of my interest in engineering and in the stuff that I used to love. And I think it's something that you need to be really like aware of and really careful. Because it can sort of creep up on you. You can not notice that it's happening, and then suddenly you're like, wow, I haven't handed in the last 4 homeworks. And especially if you're built up to, you know, if you've succeeded before and you did really well, I don't know, in secondary school or in primary school, and then as soon as you hit something that's more difficult, or if you feel like you're underperforming, then that for me, it just got triggered. As soon as I hit something more difficult than what I was experiencing before, it was like, oh well, that's gone. I just can't do anything now because I don't want to. I'm too scared, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was very much my experience as well when things get hard. But also, what you might find is for someone with ADHD, they might really over prepare, but prepare to the point where you don't actually do the thing that needs to be done. So if you look at my chapters on my PhD, on my notes section, I've got thousands of words and notes. I can write notes all day, but actually writing a sentence that's going to go in, Oh, that's anxiety provoking. That's intense. And it's the same with everything.
Imagine being a teacher with, I just wanted to make every lesson that was observed, or singing or dancing, if they'd come and observed just a normal lesson, and they've told me this because, of course, teachers, head teachers are running, milling around all over the place. They're like, if we walked into your lesson at any point, you'd get an outstanding. But we put you in a lesson observation situation where you have got to, when you're being assessed, and my lessons just went to jelly, and I was just absolutely rubbish. And it's because I wanted them to be all singing and all dancing, and actually I wanted them to be perfect, and therefore they were less than what they would normally be. So I just think that, and I'm an adult and I haven't got a grip of that, and that's still an issue for me. So can you imagine what that's like for young people when they've got to do a presentation, or when they've got to do any piece of work, and they've got to sit down and sit through an exam, and putting pen to paper. That's really incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
Imagine wanting to be conscientious but not being able to maintain your effort. Because one of the things that I've really noticed is that the effort grades with ADHD tend to be lower when actually the effort being given is actually more, but the recognition within schools is often less, and that's massively problematic. And everyone tells you how capable you are, and here you've got Rebecca and Ali and me and Tom telling you that, actually, to be fair, no one ever told me I was capable. Everyone told me that I was never going to amount to anything. But there you go. I'm the odd one out in this particular bunch. But then I'm on my third master's degree. So, the other three, and hopefully some of you sitting there watching, have been also told how capable you are. And you're like, yeah, but I can't. And I'm really trying, and I just can't. It's really, really, really difficult.
I describe them as the could have tried harder group. That's what on every single report card.
It gives you massive imposter syndrome as well. To be you're told that you are able to do great things, and then you're like, I can't even get out of bed some days because I'm too stressed out about starting work. Like that disparity is really, really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And again, shame comes into the dialogue on that particular one.
Yeah.
And we convince ourselves this time will be the time, I will manage it, because we convince ourselves we've just got to try a little harder, and it's not true, because we're already trying our damnedest. Why can't I manage it? Because I lack the skills. It's never occurred to anyone to teach me. Now, I've got a bit of a quote under there that's about behaviour, but actually I think in this context, I didn't know what concentrate meant until a lot later in life, because everyone was like, you need to concentrate, and I didn't even know what that meant because no one took it. So I was really good at ballet when I was younger. Sadly, that all went, I grew boobs and a bum, what can I say? So I ended up taking that into more of a profession. But when I was doing ballet, I could concentrate. But it never occurred to anybody to say to me, that you're doing there, that's concentration. You need to try and if they hadn't done, I think I'd at least have understood. Then when I'm sitting in a boring lesson and they're saying you need to concentrate, I'd at least have known what they meant, because I didn't know what they meant. I really genuinely didn't know what they meant.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that with ADHD you can also have hyperfocus, and that I'm able to put a lot of focus into certain things for long periods of time, and the things that I enjoy, like for Janine it was ballet, and for me it's electronics, and I'm able to do it without breaks. I'm just get so absorbed in it, but being able to translate that into something that you aren't as interested in is really difficult, because as Janine said, boredom is completely crippling when it comes to focus.
Yeah. And as adults, we are able to not do those things, or some of those things. So if you look at my report card, it's like, again, high attainment, and then you look at French and suddenly it's the only thing I'm failing. Maybe I just don't like French. Maybe I'm just not interested because I could never see the point in it.
I can't do languages.
Yeah, neither can I actually. But that's one of the things of like, I've never had an interest in languages, and you know what? As an adult, that has not been even remotely a problem in any way for my progression and my well-being. But at that time, it was incredibly important. You can't fail French. Heaven forbid. And it's like bringing context into what is actually important. What is important? Important is being able to look after yourself, do those basic fundamental skills, and find what you love. If what you love is swimming, well, actually, how helpful is doing incredibly well academically? I'm talking about Michael Phelps here, Simone Biles, one of the winningest gymnasts of all time.
Winningest.
Winningest. I'm pretty sure that's a technical term. I think I could counter the term. The winningest one. And again, I don't know how she did academically, but how important was it looking back?
Yeah, I think I've definitely been noticing recently, like there is such a huge disparity in what is held as important at school and what I've been discovering as important in my, everyday life. And I think there's a lot of really, really important skills that are not targeted by school, and some that I think that are completely unnecessary. And it's just the case, everyone's good at different things, everyone's more interested in different things, and to say that black and white, this is what you need to be doing more of and this is what you need to be doing less of, is I think just grossly unfair. And considering there's not very uniform education in things like managing your finances and budgeting, the political system, all these sort of things. It's funny how we have like French and other subjects that aren't necessarily as high up on the priority list in my mind, but I don't know, maybe I'm saying horribly controversial things.
I agree.
I think I'd say I've got a behavioural a quote there, because actually 60% of people who are diagnosed with ADHD also meet the criteria for oppositional defiance disorder. 60%. And that's because oppositional defiance disorder is ADHD plus environments. And Russell Barkley's got quite a lot to say about how easy it is to turn a compliant person into a non-compliant person by putting them into an environment where they just cannot function. If you have a child who is developing or has developed oppositional defiance disorder, it doesn't necessarily mean they're stuck with that for life. Actually, that's ADHD plus anxiety that gets them to, not ADHD plus environment that gets them to that stage. And I would go straight back to the Maslow, look at a bit of that and have a look and see what's pushing them over, what they're not managing. Because you see here, if we don't understand what the child needs, we aren't going to be able to help them, and then that's when negative behaviour occurs. Nice, another bit on perfectionism here. The problem with Mary Poppins is the pressure of being practically perfect in every way. Now, being as I'm a teacher, I'd also say that about Ofsted and Outstanding. There's a lot of pressure on there, which helps us to develop a lovely dose of imposter syndrome. So that's where we just believe that when we're doing well, that's because we are faking it. And actually it's not. It's actually because we are actually good at what we do. It's just that we are consistently inconsistent, and we don't necessarily follow through on the things that we are good at. We're good at it one day, and then the next day we just can't maintain these things, and that's not on purpose. Attribution is the part of us that either overtly blames ourselves or overtly blames everybody else and doesn't recognise that we have a role to play in our own destiny. It can go one way or it can go the other way, and obviously ideally it's in the middle, where we can look at and things and go, okay, I own that bit of what went right, that bit of what went wrong, and the rest of it's outside of my control. That's the serenity of it all. But some people go too far one way and some people go too far the other way, and perfectionism has a lot to do with that. If you are constantly trying to take responsibility for things that are outside of your control, eventually you will develop external attribution, where you blame everybody and you say it's not my fault. And I think that we'll all agree that ADHD can never be used as an excuse for the way we are. Yes, ADHD makes it harder. Do you know what? Yes, it does. but what are we going to do about it? And to become solution focused and to look at it and say, yes, that's why it's gone wrong. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to learn from it? That's really, really important. And that's when you've got that middle bit where they can own what they need to and disregard what they can't, because we can't change everything. We can't change anybody else. We only have power over ourselves. And I've seen lots of people get themselves absolutely wound up in trying to control other things and other people. And he started it, she started it, isn't going to wash. You're responsible for yourself and your own behaviour. I've done quite a lot of work with people on that in the past, and I think that could be a whole webinar of its own. And the high risk of self-harm and suicide attempts goes hand in hand with everything we've already said about mental health. We are at higher risk, and we do lack attainable role models. But look, I'm hoping there's 4 of us sat here now that you can look at and think, okay, it's going to be okay. I can be whoever I want to be. My child can be whoever my child wants to be. It's just going to be harder, but it's still doable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Tom's going, and Becca was as well. I was like, well, I don't understand this reference. But, you know, myself and Ali are going, yeah, Maria, from The Sound of Music. She is amazing. Absolute brilliant example of somebody whose the hills were alive with the sound of music, got thrown out the nunnery because she couldn't be there on time and everything else. How do you catch a wave upon the sand? How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand? You don't. You don't solve Maria. Maria doesn't need solving. Maria is perfectly imperfect. Maria has ADHD, and Maria needs and deserves, and there's a big word there, deserves to be accepted for who she is. Because as soon as she was, guess what happened? She was thriving. And she helped other people as well. And that's, for me, is the epitome of self-actualization. When you're in the right space, doing the right thing, the world is your oyster.
Mm-hmm.
Watch Sound of Music, it's very good. Shout out.
On the list now.
Who wants to talk about this one? Girls?
I was just going to say, it's kind of linking in with what we're already saying. I think what we've been saying quite a bit about the procrastination is often anxiety driven.
Yeah.
But I don't know about how then for the girls, how do you get past that? So practically solution focused, how do we resolve these difficulties around planning and preparation and procrastination? Or how do you do it, really?
I didn't
How do you
catch.
get around procrastination?
Sorry, what?
Can you repeat the question? I was really distracted by the word cloud. It's very cool.
So what tools, what strategies have you developed or do you use that are effective for combating procrastination, being effective with your planning and your prep?
Yeah, so like for me, it's I would definitely refer back to that Newton's cradle thing. I like getting started is so difficult for me, but once I'm started, it's a lot easier. I've been finding scheduling my time is amazing, and I've got my notebook in front of me, and I've got my weekly schedule, which is something that Janine has been helping me develop, is a way of planning my time. I really like structure, and I'm sure it's different for absolutely everyone. Like, you know, before I tell you all my specific things that I do, I would say it's like really important that you sort of think about and identify what motivates you. And motivation can come from different places on different days. Like some days I'm just feeling really grumpy and I don't want to do work. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy myself a pair of earrings that I've been wanting if I just get through this day and I do my thing. Or, oh, I'll bake myself a cake if I get through this day and do this thing. And other days it will be, oh, I have a deadline coming up, I want to do this, or, oh, I'm really interested in this, I'm going to schedule this into my time. But I'm fine. I'd say number one, scheduling has changed my life. It's really, really helpful.
Becca, what about you?
Yeah, I'm similar. I really need structure. I try and have a very similar routine every day, which helps with procrastination. But my main thing is that I have my it's like a habit tracker to-do list kind of combination in just like a little, I don't know what it's called, like dotted paper. So I put little squares in, and basically I add to the to-do list throughout the day. So I always try to make sure that all the boxes are filled. And then once they are, then I can do something fun. So, for example, I didn't let myself, because I made cakes the other day, and I didn't let myself go and do baking, which I really enjoy doing, until I finished my lessons today. That really, really helps me. I think it's like a balance of giving yourself rewards because you deserve to be rewarded and you don't have to be constantly miserable. You don't have to work all the time. And also, thinking, I do need to get some work done and that reward does help me. Please don't try and punish yourself by not having breaks, everybody. Please do not do that. It's very unfair on you. It will deteriorate your mental health. Have breaks when you need breaks. Do other fun things to reward yourself for doing well.
matter how on track you've been, you need to still take breaks. It's so tempting to be like, oh, I got really distracted in that last hour, so I can't do anything. And then, in the next, so therefore I need to go and work for the rest of the day to make up for it. But the break is really helpful. As Janine just put in the chat, there's the Pomodoro, is that how it?
Probably spelt it wrong, but yeah.
I don't know how it's pronounced.
It's like just timing and having that. And I use the 45-15, which is work for 45 minutes and break for 15, work for 45, break for 15, and then that might then be your lunch break or whatever. But I would never, I do not sit for longer than 45 minutes. This is kind of like an exception to the rule, but it's interactive, so it's different. And obviously I can rock on my chair and everything else, and I don't sit for more than 45 minutes, and I'm in my 40s. And I have a standing desk as well as a sitting desk, so I can move between the two, because actually I can't sit down for that long without kind of starting to go absolutely nuts. When I've used this with my children, I've used the 45-15, I notice they genuinely move about 20-25 minutes. So it's one of those things where you've got to watch and pay attention and learn what works for you and be okay with that, and then use that to sort of lengthen that and to make sure you're getting things done. You don't have to do it the same way as everybody else does it. You, especially during lockdown, you are at liberty to learn your way, and you absolutely should.
I just want to reiterate is that for me, probably the biggest problem was the mental blocks before I had to, I said this before, I know, but I can't stress enough to really identify how you feel about approaching work, and figuring out how you can approach work. And for everyone, that's going to be different, but it all comes along with that sort of that feeling of shame, is that you need to be able to forgive yourself for not working to a ridiculous standard. It's okay to be imperfect, as Janine has said several times.
You're in lockdown.
It needs to be acknowledged that actually one of the things that's quite common in ADHD as part of the executive function challenges that we have is that many of us, almost all of us, are time blind. That means our perception of time is screwy. And we completely overestimate or underestimate how long things are going to take, which is one of the reasons that we leave things to the last minute, apart from the fact that that's kind of we're waiting for the adrenaline to kick in to help us to get to that point. But it's also that we really often completely misunderstand how long things are going to take us and what we can achieve in a certain time, sometimes over and sometimes under. And then when we actually finally get down to sort of sitting down to do the work, we may not have allowed enough time, or there may just be too much chaos around us to be able to actually sit down and absorb ourselves in learning, or in whatever it happens to be, because we've kind of created this chaos and we haven't got space, and then we haven't allowed enough time. And you should have had, and it's one of the reasons it's important to get a diagnosis actually, is because you should be having access to learning mentors and things who help you with that sort of stuff. It is something that I do as a coach, but you as if you're in education, you should have access to that within your establishment, so that they can help you with that sort of thing. But you're always welcome to reach out to me.
That does link to a question that's just been asked, and there are a couple of questions which we'll get to. And it's how do I get school to understand that my son has difficulties around concentration? He spends most of his time in the corridor, so he won't go to now he won't go to school, and we've got a bit of refusing coming on. So how do we? And I think that's in reality it's a webinar unto itself.
Yeah. If your child is diagnosed as a point of law, that should be understood.
If
I
you are not getting support, I don't know where you are locality wise, but there's organisations such as their Parent Partnership, or local authority support, who will go into school meetings with you to support you and make sure that the school is fulfilling the regulations and the law within the equality and discrimination. I've found them to be absolutely excellent, at least in Newcastle and Gateshead. They were absolutely brilliant. Parents felt really supported and understood by them, because that's their job, is to support parents and to help that communication between school and parents. So local authority, SEND teams, SENDIAS, again, it depends where you are, locality-wise.
You've got parent forums as well. And,
yeah.
There's people like me, if it comes down to it, but obviously use what's free and local to you wherever possible, and don't feel like you're on your own with it. So.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking to this, son, I don't really know much about the sort of higher level things that you guys are talking about, but in terms of like what I do to focus in class, I think identifying what you enjoy and what you are good at focusing at is important. So for example, I know that I really like laying out my notes in a nice way, and so I will focus on that during my lessons, so that I know that I can be focusing on and not being disruptive in the class. And actually linking to that, I find that notes just in general are a super helpful way for me to focus, because if it's not, I've literally got a piece of paper right now and I'm scrolling, I'm not even taking notes about this session. If it doesn't go into my head unless I've put it on paper. But again, I'm sure there's loads of resources online. It's different for everyone.
Yeah, it is different for everyone, and it's a very, very difficult situation, but it is a point of law if your child has a diagnosis. Well, actually, to be fair, if your child has a need regardless of diagnosis, but that's, we can say that that's the theory. We do know in practice it doesn't always work that way.
But I build on what Ali said.
Pardon?
I just build on what Ali said. If the teacher is using like PowerPoints or something to that effect, if you have a printed out copy in front of you, that really, really helps. My geography teacher used to do this with students with ADHD, because there was like that class was a reason. All does ADHD. And so having a printed out copy really helped, because it meant that if you got something, you could move on. Because if you already understand something in a lesson, then your brain's already moving on, and so then you don't hear the next thing they're speaking about. So having a printed out copy might really, really help. Just a suggestion.
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that's a reasonable adjustment if you have a diagnosis of ADHD is you should be able to, if there is a PowerPoint presentation, it's very reasonable to be given a printout of those slides so that you can make notes directly onto them, and we call that scaffolding, and it just makes life easier, because the reality is, if you've got ADHD, do you know what's going to happen in every single lesson? You're going to get distracted. You can't help it. It's going to happen. It's a question of how quickly you can return to task. You're not actually going to be able to stop the distraction. You can minimize it. It's the key actually is returning quickly to task, and scaffolding for that, for in this particular instance, as Rebecca's just said, is having a printout of slides so that it's like, okay, I lost attention, where am I? Okay, I'm here, and then you're able to carry on. If you haven't got that in front of you, how much harder is it to jump back in? And that's why it's a point of law, that you have those things that are in place that allow your child to jump back in, because their attention is going to wander. It just is. That's just the way it is. So I had fun putting this bit together based on the things that Ali and Becca have told me have been useful to them. I even used Rebecca's choice of highlighters there, and if you look, there's a little pile of index cards, and they're colour coded because Rebecca likes a bit of colour coding. So
everything.
And I've got post-it notes and things around the place as well. So, do you want to talk about that, girls?
My desk is covered in stationery. It's one of the things that has helped me the most. And I don't know what it is about it, but being able to present information in different ways has been super helpful for my focusing. Just through revision, I like reiterating things by making my own notes, and I like having flashcards and that sort of thing. And I guess it's sort of having levels of connecting things on different having ways of connecting things on different levels is super helpful. So especially if you're doing things like GCSEs or A levels, it allows you to more comprehensively understand an exam question and answer it. So yeah, I mean, stationery is lovely. I love it.
I got a picture of a stopwatch on there. Rebecca, do you want to tell everybody why there's a stopwatch on there?
Time blindness, which basically everyone who has ADHD has. In my exams, especially for English, obviously I know a lot of people with parents rather than students, but there's like specific times you're supposed to spend on each one, and I would just get completely sidetracked and I was spending way too much time in the first question, and I'd be completely screwed for the rest of the exam, to be frank. And so I had my stopwatch, which I brought in, and they were like, "Are you allowed to do that?" I was like, "How is it any different from having a watch?" So I've had that in my English exams and a couple of other ones as well, and it helped so much. So much. I did much better in my English exams in my actual GCSEs than I did in my mocks because of that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I recommend that massively. It helped.
Got pictures of planners, pretty planners or practical planners, because not everyone here is a girl. They're really useful, and you know what, you'll dip into them and you'll dip out of them. Sometimes you'll use them and sometimes you won't, but having a planner and developing those skills over time and using them when you need to, and when you realise things are going awry, being able to go back into them. You haven't failed when you stop using something because it worked for a while, so that it did actually work. So just go back to it when you realise you're losing it. And I've also got a whiteboard on there, because we have to externalize our executive function, and the best tool for externalizing your executive function is a whiteboard, and you can use it in a whole multitude of ways. Again, I feel like I could do a mini webinar on that, because the different ways you can use a whiteboard. I love my whiteboard. I'm sat here now. I have a whiteboard there. I have my my year planner there, and I have a pin board here, and that's what I have to have in order to function fully as an adult with ADHD. So I wouldn't ask my children to function with much less. Obviously not everyone can have a great big whiteboard on their wall, but that or something like it. You have to find ways of doing things. Ali, you use more your planner, don't you? And your planner comes out every day and is with you when you're studying, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, so it's working what works for an individual, and recognizing that you're going to need more than one thing that works, because do you know what, we like novelty, so you're going to need to swap them around a fair bit as well. So
yeah, mixing things up is so important for me.
I use this, my phone. So there's my weekly planner. Everything goes into this. If it's not in my plan, it doesn't exist.
Whereas I have that, and I still, that wouldn't be enough for me. But yeah, that's yeah, we're all different. Even though we have ADHD in common, we're all different, and we've all got different needs. So you have to tweak it, keep going with things until you find out what works, and find out more things that work, and switch them around. So GCSE bite size, of course, I think most of us have heard
three.
Pardon? What did you say, Becca?
Oh, I've got three different types of stuff right here. I use them all daily.
Okay.
Sorry, it's lagging.
Okay, yeah, it is lagging. Both Ali and Becca, and actually a fair amount of my clients, I swear I should be on commission and I'm not, have really enjoyed using Seneca for GCSEs and for A-levels, and actually for all key stages. There is a free service and there is a subscribed service, and even the subscribed service is good value for money. And what did you say about it earlier? It doesn't make you feel...
Uh-oh.
Oh, looks like she's paused.
Okay, she was saying that it doesn't make you feel like you don't know something. It makes you feel like you don't know something yet and that you're on the way to understanding it, which I think is a big deal. And of course it's interactive rather than just the book. And they both really like the is it CBG books?
Yeah.
You can't go far wrong with those, and having like a different resources for different times, and YouTube videos, as long as you're going into the right ones, are actually useful too. So on there I've got I don't know if any of your children, as bright as they might be struggling with maths, and Celia, who does a lot of work with me, and Ruth, who does a lot of work with me, have collaborated to bring an outstanding accelerated program for maths over the summer. And that's definitely worth a look if you're looking at a child who is currently running at 3 and you want them to get to a 4, or they're running at 4 and you want them to get to 5. That's a good option to be looking at, and both Celia and Ruth, because they're associated with me, have had quite a lot of input in terms of what ADHD and neurodiversity is, so autism and ADHD on that path as well, in case there's an interest to anybody. They're brilliant people, and obviously I've put myself down at the coaching for neurodiversity. That's how to book with, probably actually would be with Celia myself, because I'm actually full, but I have other coaches. And there's some brilliant podcasts there, particularly for parents, but actually I think it'd be interesting for young people to listen to as well, because it's myself and Tony Lloyd from Dr. Tony Lloyd from ADHD Foundation talking, and that's 2 adults talking as experts about ADHD, and then there's another parent comes in for the second one. You will come away from that knowing so much more than you know now, so that's why those are on there, so have a look at those.
One of the questions is being asked about support groups for teens specifically. Now, I don't know what the area is, but I've found it, I didn't know of any when I was in SIPs that were teen-specific ADHD. Just finding an ADHD-specific support group was quite hard depending on where you live.
What I would like to know is whether people would be interested in us doing that, because Rebecca has a twin brother who's also got ADHD, and obviously we've got Ali, and I have access to other young people who are incredible, who might be able to sort of, so the older ones sort of supporting the younger ones, but I would need to know whether people would be interested in doing that online, because actually it doesn't really exist. As far as I'm aware, there were pockets, of course, where it does, but generally speaking, it's not something that's happening. It is something I would like to make happen, but it is. I know parents might want it to happen, but I have to know whether children would be interested in it. Young people would be interested in it. I don't know.
That'd be a case of email you, Janine, and
yeah, because I'd need to have a handful of people to sort of like to set it up and then see whether it works or not. Because it would obviously need to be monitored, because young people, vulnerability and stuff, but actually I'm thinking the older ones could support the younger ones with just a little bit of input from us adults.
So there's a couple of yeses coming out in the chat there. So Janine's email will be at the end of this presentation, which we're coming to shortly, I think.
We are.
And, just give her an email and you can start the machinations and adjusting those cogs to see what's going to happen there. But there's very limited, depending on where you live, there is very limited peer support. I know Newcastle and Gateshead have a parent support group. Newcastle didn't anywhere last time I was working there. It's a bit of a postcode lottery. And although the Facebook groups and the forums can be helpful, there is a hell of a lot of negativity in those groups as well, and a lot of false information. So I would be hesitant to point people towards them unless it's one that's policed by experts who know when false information is being spread, because I think that perpetuates the negative outcomes of, oh, my kid's got ADHD, all hope is lost because so-and-so's child has just gone to prison, and it's like, well, hang on, you don't know what else has been going on there.
We are overrepresented in criminal justice, but we're also overrepresented in entrepreneurialism. So you know what? my big passion is making sure as many go down the route of entrepreneurialism and thriving and being their best possible self. So I'm up for it. If other people are, I'll definitely facilitate it if people are interested. And I've got colleagues who I can see have commented who I would trust to help me facilitate that, so I wouldn't have to do it all by myself. So that's all good. Okay, I will send these slides out. This is a video of myself and Becca talking on Channel 5 about ADHD, and for those who hadn't realised, Becca is actually my daughter. So parents, please go easy on yourselves, because even knowing all that I know, I haven't been able to completely prevent Rebecca from struggling. So go easy on yourselves. Kids, go easy on your parents and on yourselves too. It's hard what you're trying to do. Life is harder with ADHD, but it's okay, and you will be okay. It's just, yeah, your effort levels are going to have to be higher than everybody else's until you hit your groove, and then you're going to find your strengths come into play. So there's Tom's details, and he's just an all-round superstar. I'm very grateful for having you here this evening, Tom.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us here. I really enjoy doing this sort of work, because I don't do as much of the clinical work now that I'm in a research area, and I teach mental health nursing, so I don't get to talk about my passion as much because everyone's sick of hearing it.
And then there's me, and you can access Becca and Ali through me. If you had any questions you wanted to ask, I would be able to ask them. And as I say, Becca has a twin brother who's taking a non-academic route, has a different story to tell, which I'm hoping to get him involved in something at a later date, and certainly to have him on board when we establish a teen community. So, right, any more questions, Tom?
Just one really, and that is tips for teachers and kids or young people trying to get or maintain focus in class. So classroom strategies that parents could take to teachers, or teachers who might be in the audience right now could talk about, could utilize. I know I've got a few options. What about you? You
share yours first then, Tom.
So my first one is movement, and this argument that kids need to sit for 6 hours. I don't sit for 6 hours. So it's, why can't that young person or child get up and have a movement break, have a sensory break, have something that helps them stay in the moment from a sensory perspective? And what are their sensory needs? And within that, what are their attentional needs? So can we do things to improve that attention? Can you, as you said earlier, give them, the young person, a printout or a different modality of teaching? So if everything's always done by the whiteboard and just reading off the whiteboard, can you turn that into something interactive? Can you get the students to debate each other a little bit and have some for, some against, so they're up and they're about and they're engaged? The person who struggles to concentrate having maybe more of an active role, because it's hard to get distracted when you're actively engaged in something that's maybe challenging or interesting. Is again an appropriate assessment for learning within that is always important. Are there any other additional learning needs? Is the work too hard? Or I know my problem was, it was too easy. I would refuse to do my work because I was bored. I would tell the teachers, well, you know I can answer this question. What's the point in me even writing anything down? Give me something more challenging, which teachers didn't really seem to like at the time. So where is the work in that zone of proximal development where it's hard enough to be interesting but not too hard? There's a few. I don't know about the rest of you.
Becca, if you could tell teachers one thing that would be helpful in the classroom, what would it be?
Be adaptable. Be prepared that not everyone is going to learn the same way. People are going to know what they need better than you're going to know a lot of the time. When I was in year 10, I think, for maths, I asked if I could work from the textbook rather than from the whiteboard, because helped me to learn quicker, which is why it's better for me. I ended up doing more, just with the class in year 11, but that's what I did in year 10. And for my chemistry, I was getting 4s and 5s, so that's like a C. And I ended up just using the textbook and the specification and basically teaching myself, because it was just quicker that way for me. And I switched teachers in the middle of that, and he was completely fine with that, my new teacher, and I ended up getting a really high grade. In comparison to my 4, I got like a 7, so very different, obviously. So yeah, that's why I recommend just be adaptable, and the parents recommend just to say to teachers, then they all learn the same. You have to adapt different techniques for different students. It's kind of the point.
Yeah. Ali?
Okay, so for teachers, I would say think before you tell someone not to do something. A lot of the things which teachers pick up on as being not acceptable in a classroom, like doodling or moving or fidgeting or whatever, like usually people are doing that for a very good reason, which is that it helps them focus. For me, if I don't doodle for during certain portions of the lesson can't speak, I find it really, really hard to focus. And so when teachers have gotten, breathing down my neck about the fact that I'm doodling, I'm like, well, I can't. Why are you telling me to stop something which is a coping mechanism for me not being able to focus? And for students and parents, one of the things, apart from all the rest of the things that have already been brought up, is working from the specification or the textbook. As Becca said, it's really helpful, because sometimes I find that when teachers dilute it with however they explain a certain part of the syllabus, it can be a lot more confusing than if I'm just reading it from the textbook, because I'm getting distracted by whatever's going on in the classroom. Yeah.
I think it comes down to having conversations with each individual child. So there is this perception that a child with ADHD needs to sit front, centre, direct line of sight to the teacher. I would hate that. And actually most of the children that I've worked with who have ADHD have hated that and have needed to sit with their back to the wall. Because if you were in a class and you were distracted by something happening behind you, whereas if you were in a class, you're distracted by something in front of you, so much less distraction, so much less disruption. And if your back is to the wall, the focus is always going to return to the front. I would also say it needs to be realistic. You are not going to stop a child with ADHD from being distracted. You can minimize distractions. But you can't remove them completely, because that's not realistic. So it is always a question of scaffolding so the child can return to task. You are not going to stop a child with ADHD from getting distracted. So if pencils need sharpening, that's the child with ADHD gets to do them. If there's an errand needs running, ideally you'd send the child with ADHD to go and do it, because you're facilitating movement, you're increasing their sense of belonging, which we've already said is something that's one of the things that's lacking. You're giving them purpose. Movement produces dopamine, which is one of the things that we lack. So actually preventing a child from moving, fidgeting, fiddling is detrimental to their ability to learn. And I need my husband to shut the dog up. I can't concentrate, there's an distraction, come back to task. So yeah, it is a question of minimising distractions as best you can, but really it's about the scaffolding so that when they come back when they realise they've gone off track, it's being able to return to track really, really quickly. So having a task list is useful. Having a printout of a presentation is really, really useful. Being able to say where in the textbook that person is. So even if you're not using that textbook that particular day, but the textbook's there, to have that available to them and open so that it's just there, so that when they've gone off task they can get back in again, because they're not going to stop it. I just want
to quickly clarify what I said earlier. Of course, if there's a child being really actively disruptive to other people's learning, then that's something that you need to address. It's not like, oh, they've got ADHD, just leave them be and they need to do whatever. You know, I'm saying within reason, just check yourself and think about, oh, is there a reason that they're doing that? Is that helping them? Is that disrupting other people actively? Which I would consider a lot of the coping mechanisms are the most helpful for ADHD. It doesn't affect anyone else, and it shouldn't affect anyone else. And that's kind of the important thing. And I don't think it's because teachers are trying to be sort of annoyed by people with ADHD. I don't think it's coming from a place of, I don't know, malice. It's just, I think there's just so much sort of that's not known about ADHD, and I think there should be better education for teachers.
And the pressure on curriculum, there's pressure on curriculum and the pressure on behaviour as well.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the part of it. And absolutely, as you say, there's not a teacher that went to work this morning thinking, which child can I make miserable today? That's just not going to happen. But then their children don't go to school thinking, which teacher can I make miserable today either. These things happen rather than being intent. So
yeah, I agree. No, very few people go into teaching because they want to have children with difficulties or disabilities hate their life. Yeah, they go into teaching because they really care and they want to help people. It's just, it's stressful and it's overwhelming, and there's it is more challenging working with people who have a difference in learning from the cookie cutter.
I've seen teachers be absolutely heartbroken as they can see events unfolding and the inevitability of a child they're working with going to be excluded from school. I have seen teachers be absolutely beside themselves because they never saw that coming when they were training to be a teacher. It's just not something that most teachers actually ever want to see, let alone be part of. And it's just, it happens. And, you know, not all children are suited to mainstream school.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yeah.
Are we done?
I think we might be. We're only half an hour over.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Rebecca, Becca, Ali, and Tom for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us and for sharing your questions with us. I hope you have enjoyed it. I do intend to upload it to our YouTube channel, and I have ADHD, so it might be a little while, but at some point you will get an email with a link to it where it's been uploaded somewhere where you can access it and share it with other people and spread the word. I'm definitely available for teacher training if you want to convince your school, and I think Tom probably is too. Yeah. So and I'm in Northamptonshire, but I'll travel wherever, and Tom is
northeast. Northumberland, Newcastle.
Northumberland, Newcastle, but we'll travel a little bit too. So, and obviously we know other people as well. So hopefully we can get some training in schools. If you need us, give us a shout. We want to make a difference because we were once that child. I am that parent, and thank you to Rebecca and Ali for being superb role models and examples that things can be just dandy. That's not true. They're going to be hard, but they're okay. What was that, Tom?
Thank you for putting this on. And yeah. Again, there will be more webinars in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, there will. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
You'll have to end it, Tom, because it's over to you.
No, I'm gonna let everyone slowly eke out.
That's fine. You do that then.
We'll just continue waving.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's one of those things like when you're in meetings at work, you never wave at a meeting, but now this is what we do.
Yeah, this is our life now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I am going to leave now, but absolutely really enjoyed that. Pleasure working with you all and hearing your story. You were very articulate as well, and able to show that people with ADHD aren't always disruptive 7-year-old boys.
Yeah, that was
which is what the narrative would be. That's what the what's the word? The stereotype is, but actually it's impacting people who are also really quite clever.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Right then. See you later.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Bye. Bye.